Hey boys and girls, I'm so glad you could join me today. Today, we're going to be talking about yielding isometrics, or an isometric movement where we pause in the bottom, the midpoint, or the top of a lift. Yielding isometrics are a great way for us to increase our training intensity, even if we can't increase the load. Let's do a yielding isometric together. Wasn't that fun, boys and girls? Hey guys, so for our first in-depth video on ways to increase training intensity without high loads, we're going to talk about yielding isometrics. So yielding isometrics can confer a couple different benefits when we're training. The first thing is that they increase peripheral fatigue. When we're training, we generally can think about two types of fatigue if we kind of look at it from a reductionist lens, and that's fatigue in the tissue, in the muscle tissue, and fatigue in the central nervous system and the ability to kind of all of the neuroelectrical chemical elements that come from the top down. Yielding isometrics confer most of their benefit to fatigue in the tissue. Anytime we increase fatigue in the tissue, we have the potential to increase motor unit recruitment. When we increase motor unit recruitment, we're training more of our tissue that we have, and the more that we train, the more area that we create stimulus to potentially benefit from. There is some small evidence that the muscle can shorten a small amount and that the tendon can lengthen a small amount, even when we're at a fixed joint angle. Some research points to the fact that this may offer hypertrophy benefits similar to heavy weightlifting in partial range of motion training. So a potential here is that even though we don't have heavy weights available to us, using these yielding isometrics in partial ranges of motion where we are very strong or where we would like to become very strong is a potential gain that we could make even though we don't have a lot of weights available to us right now. There is also evidence that shows that yielding isometrics over pressing against something over other types of isometrics, that it can offer transfer to eccentric strength more. So going back to our original video, eccentric strength is that lowering portion of the lift where a lot of muscle damage occurs, where a lot of the potential for hypertrophy and strength gain occurs. So yielding isometrics may be a good decision if trying to increase your eccentric strength is something that you're after. Lastly, there's some evidence that isometric contraction can improve training stimulus by inducing metabolic fatigue locally in the tissue. And this happens in part due to local ischemia. So anytime I flex a muscle and it stays flexed in that position, it's creating kind of a choking off of the blood supply. So it's working similar to blood flow restriction training or something like that. And when we do that, we create a hypoxic environment in the tissue, kind of lots of different things that come out of that can improve our stimulus for training and for hypertrophy. So when we're applying yielding isometrics to our training, there's a couple ways that we can do that. Generally, the kind of format for a yielding isometric is a pause at a point in a lift. This is very broad. Most commonly, that's a pause at the mid-range or the bottom range of a lift. So say we're using the bench press as an example, I may come all the way to the bottom, pause halfway up, time my count, and then finish the rep. That would be a yielding isometric in the mid-range. The other place you commonly see them is at the bottom range of motion. So for example, if you've ever done pause squats where you descend to the bottom position, pause and hold for a period of time, and come out of the lift, that's a pause squat, that's a type of yielding isometric. And those are both really excellent lifts when you're back in the gym training. The next thing that they're really useful for, and I think this is going to be the most relevant thing for all of us right now, is body weight lifts. So if you find yourself feeling like push-ups, body weight squats, body weight lunges, etc. are becoming too easy and that you don't have load that you can add to them, adding yielding isometrics for a time, either in the mid-range or in the bottom range, can be a really great way to increase the intensity of those lifts and still squeak a little bit of benefit out of them. If you're doing that, I find that adding them to the place where you're weakest can be of most benefit. So for example, say when you fatigue on push-ups, you start fatiguing by having a hard time coming up out of the bottom position, you could start doing some sets with a yielding isometric in the bottom position of your push-up. The next thing that they're really useful for is if you only have very light weights available to you. So right now, I know a lot of folks are just stuck with like a 10-pound set of dumbbells at home. And so if you find yourself doing compound lifts with them, like squats or push-ups or pull-ups, or you find yourself doing isolation exercises like bicep curls, delt raises, etc., adding an isometric to those can be a big challenge. So for example, adding a yielding isometric in the middle of a bicep curl or adding a yielding isometric in the fully extended position of a lateral raise can really drive up the intensity. So when I do them, I commonly keep my pause between 3 to 10 seconds. Some of that has to do with the style of training that I do, and there's a lot of science we won't talk about because it opens a whole can of worms. But generally speaking, I'm pausing for 3 to 10 seconds for 5 to 10 reps, and I usually do between 2 to 4 sets, depending on where I'm at in a cycle. So if you spend some time experimenting with yielding isometrics, you have questions, you find that they've been really beneficial to you, or you have any confusion, please drop a comment or feel free to ask questions below.